This episode comes with an explicit content warning. There is some fruity language.
Priesthood Dispatches.
He's a man. It's awesome, funny, random, doesn't make any sense, but it's good.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today is After Dinner Chat number 27, and we're delving back into the TikTok goldmine. And this evening we have the one and the only, not the white wizard, who is going to take us through some of his TikToks and also teach us very special ways of breaking the word of wisdom. So without further ado, let's bring in not the white wizard, or Chris, all the way from Indiana. How you doing, Chris?
Hey, thanks for having me.
No, thank you for being here. So Chris, if no one's on TikTok right now, go on. The link is in the description below for Not the White Wizard. For anyone that has been on and knows Not the White Wizard, you know that Chris's opinions about church are more on the Exmo side of things, but let's find out a little bit more about where Chris comes from. And yeah, so Chris, how did you, I guess, become a Mormon? Were you born into the church?
Yeah. So raised in the church. Mother was, several generations in at least. My father was a convert, and he actually was converted in England when he was stationed there as part of in the Air Force in like the 70s. I think Vietnam War was going on, and so thanks for that. I was raised in Texas, so kind of. I would say kind of standard, typical Mormon upbringing for someone raised in Mormonism outside of kind of Utah, Idaho area. Boy Scout, Eagle Scout, went on a mission, married the first girl I dated when I got back from my mission. 4 kids, almost right out of the gate. And
wow.
So went to BYU for my undergrad, and then from there went back to Texas for medical school. And it was in medical school that I found my way out of the church. And it was there's looking at it. There seems to be kind of 2 broad divisions on what leads people out of the church, and there are people who leave because they see social issues, the LGBT, racism, feminism, things like that. They don't like the way the church responds to these social issues, and so they distance from the church in that direction. And there's the people who have more of a doctrinal issue, and I was one of those. So yeah. I was absolutely hard right-wing, conservative, If Trump had been the guy at that point in my life, I would have been 100% behind him. And that was just very much because my religion informed my kind of political and social views. And so I didn't see any problems with discrimination against LGBT or people of color or women, because that was what the church endorsed, and I accepted that and embraced that specifically because it's okay. The church says it's okay, so everybody else needs to get off our back about it. And what eventually led me out of the church was I was, learning about science. My undergraduate was in chemistry in medical school. You learn about the scientific method, and you learn how to apply the scientific method and kind of think about things in a logical and rational way. But there's this concept that I don't know if other people look at it this way, but I think I call it compartmentalization, where people who've been indoctrinated in something, they think about things using different sets of cognitive rules depending on the context. So this is why you have, for example, Mormons who are just pillars of their field. And they may like Russell M. Nelson, he's a physician, he's a cardiothoracic surgeon. He was a notable cardiothoracic surgeon, right? And yet also believes, nonsense. And that's because when he's doing cardiothoracic surgery, when he did do cardiothoracic surgery, he probably used a set of cognitive rules that were completely different than what he would use when he was sitting in a church meeting. And I was no exception to that. And so when I was in medical school, there was a moment where I was talking to a fellow student, and we were having a missionary moment. You know, we were having a missionary moment. I was telling him about Joseph Smith. And he saw the light come down and golden plates and Nephites and Lamanites, and he stopped me and he was like, "You don't really believe that, do you?" Just like that. He said it just like that. He goes, "You don't really." And it was so funny because that was the first time you had people who were like rude or didn't listen or who weren't interested, but I'd never had anybody who expressed incredulity, but not incredulity at what I was saying, but incredulity at that I believed it. He had respect for me and he was like, "You don't really believe that, do you?" And I was like, "Oh no, yeah. I mean, there's like good evidence to support the Book of Mormon and stuff like that." And he was like, "Yeah, okay, all right, fine," and kind of dropped it. And I was like, "Well, I need to go and find some good evidence, evidence-based, there has to be something good." And internet, deep dive into the internet, and I, found the CES letter. John DeLynn was probably early in his whole thing, maybe not super early. This would have been around maybe like 2010, 2011. So about 10 years ago. So there wasn't as much available. I was into Mormon Think, and there was like a New Order Mormon forum, and Rock Waterman, I think, was a blog that I read a lot, and then the CES letter, and I read the CES letter, and I was like, I don't believe this anymore. So kind of where I'm at now is very much a post-Mormon. I think Mormonism keeps you in as long as you have people around you that you care about who are in. And as of, I think, last year, my wife and my kids and we all officially resigned. And we kind of had an anti-baptism. And I think this was is this one of the things that you bring up on your... It
is, yeah. Let me grab it right now. We can watch
if you want
the
to,
video.
we can talk about that.
Yeah. Let me just let you carry on, and I will just find out now.
So the gist is for me, resigning from the church was kind of a non-thing, because first off, it wasn't something I was going to do unless my wife wanted to do it. Yeah. She was in the church. She stayed in the church for probably a good 10 years after I came out. But even then I was kind of on the fence about like formally resigning your name, because I'm like, even then, if this was a country club and you don't want to be a member of a country club anymore, you just stop paying your dues and you stop going to the country club, right? Yeah. And having to formally resign your name, to me, was a little bit like giving them more power than they deserved. And so I was kind of on the fence about it, but my wife was like, "I don't want our kids to be hassled. I don't want people, we still have in-laws and stuff. I don't want them hassling our kids when they move out and having people come by their house and stuff like that." And I was like, "Okay, that's fine." So, and we also kind of wanted to make a moment of it. We wanted to have kind of an anti-baptism. So what we ended up doing was we had kind of a vacation down to the Florida Keys. We spent some time on the beach, and they had kind of a thing set up with like a bonfire. It was at the end of the year, so it was New Year's, and they said, take something that you want to expel from your life, something that you want to send out into the universe and be done with. And we were like, what a perfect opportunity. So we each took we wrote the Mormon Church, and we each signed our name on the piece of paper, and we put it up, and we put it in the bonfire, and then they pushed the little bonfire out onto the water. And it was like, I was like, this was probably as meaningful and as good of an experience as any church ordinance that I'd participated in. So yeah.
I watched the video, and we'll watch it now, and I was jealous because I thought this is exactly what I want, like, everyone to do. Let's see the video.
Nowadays they just talk, but they talk about nothing. Nowadays everybody wanna say something. Goddamn, I'm the man and it feel like it. Give a damn about a hater when I feel like it. Not today, not today, not today.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like,
go ahead.
It's like a Viking funeral. It's like you put the church on that little thing and shot the flaming arrow, and you gave it to him. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, it was a, and it's one of those things that like my wife and I will still have conversations, and our conversations are less about like how much we dislike the church, but more about us deconstructing on how the church informed so deeply how we viewed things about the world, how we viewed things about each other, how it shaped our lives in ways that we didn't even appreciate. So we still talk about that, but it's like not even a thing for our kids. We were very fortunate that my oldest son is 17, my youngest is 10, but for 10 years they were in a family with a mixed religious background. So my wife believed, I didn't. My wife handled it very, very well. She probably handled me leaving the church better than I handled her staying in for a number of years. There were times where I was not as patient as I probably should have been. But it's something that when we talk about it, it's not even really on the radar for our kids, and so which is good, because they don't seem to have a whole lot of like just blistering trauma from it. Where my wife and I we still talk about
it's nuts.
How it really does.
I was talking to my kids about tithing, and my 10-year-old daughter just said to me, "Dad, that's blackmail."
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, like a 10-year-old just boiled the whole thing down, because she's like, you have to pay them money and then they say you can go to heaven. I'm like, yeah. She's like, that's blackmail.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When we talk about this Arizona case about sexual assault and having to meeting with the bishops and doing things that my wife and I were talking about were like, thank goodness neither of us were sexually abused by leader, or at least physically abused. But the amount of trust that was placed in leaders unquestioningly, I was put in so many risky, dangerous situations that my parents just put me into. They were like, oh, you're going to go on this camp out with this guy who's kind of sketchy and hasn't been to church in years, and we don't really know who he is, and it's just going to be you and him and like 2 other kids. That's fine. That's fine. Standard. Nothing. Yeah. So, so situations like that. And when we talk about that with our kids are just like, what?
Dude,
so,
I served as a bishop, and LDS Living actually recently did the whole once a bishop, always a bishop thing, because it's the priesthood office. So I'm still a bishop. So I thought the church hotline is for bishops and stake presidents. So I called. Curtin McConkie, they run a tight ship. I couldn't get through to anyone at Curtin McConkie apart from the lady who answered the phone. She wasn't having it. But I'm in the UK, so I got the phone number for the UK helpline, and I called the UK helpline. The UK helpline was answered by the solicitor who kind of runs the helpline, because it's a lot smaller over here, so they just have 1 or 2 guys. It went direct to his phone or his cell phone or whatever, and he asked me, "Are you a leader in the church?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm a bishop," and that was enough. We got going. And we had a 15-minute conversation that I recorded, but I can't play because, it's 2 parts to consent. Yeah. And I've already got letters from church solicitors about different things. I don't need one about some case of defamation of this solicitor or whatever. But
was this just an interview, or sorry, am I allowed to ask? Was this just an interview, or were you presenting a situation for him to respond to?
I called him as a bishop, and unfortunately, I went through a situation early in my life that was church related but never resolved. So I used that situation. So I didn't lie to him. I wanted to make a point that I wasn't making up some abuse situation, because I was really sensitive to that. So I called him and just said, I am a bishop and I'm aware, of this situation. This young man told me, that young man being me. He asked me for my ward information, and I just kind of said, well, I'm nervous to give it because one of the parties involved is very litigious, as in the church, which is one of the parties involved in the call, very litigious. So, he really nice guy. And at the end, when asked him his name again, he's actually really good friends with my dad. So that could come back to bite me on the ass. But yeah, he was good in the fact that he ended the call with, Bishop, if there's any danger to the child, call the police immediately. Don't. And he specifically said, don't worry about processes. Don't worry about, church, whatever. Just call the police if there's any danger. Which I thought was good. But a couple of things that were said in between, or for me, one of the things was like a solicitor answered the phone. I expected some kind of admin person to answer the phone who had a background in law and therapy and family law and stuff, who would then maybe escalate it to Kurt McConkie or a solicitor. But it was a very high-ranking solicitor here in the UK that answered the phone. And there's only two people, him and his son, who cover France, the UK, and Ireland. So his son does all the French speaking, and he does the UK and Ireland. But yeah, it was very kind of, at one point he spoke about the church as a corporation, knowing something. Basically, he said, you need to talk to the young man who's told you these things. That young man would have been me. And you need to ask him permission to talk to his parents, and then ask the parents to go to the police. And if the parents don't want to go to the police, then he said, then we have a problem, because the church as a legal entity knows something that the police should know but don't know, which I thought was interesting, that they kind of take that thing now, that they know something and they know the police should know it. So I spoke about the priest privilege, how much am I breaking privilege by going to the police? And he just said that you shouldn't go to the police without talking to him again, and he would send it up the line to the senior brethren who would make the decision about whether I could break the priest privilege and go to the police, which I thought was interesting, because obviously in the Arizona case, they didn't break the privilege. And my question would be, did that go up the line to the senior brethren to decide if they were going to break that privilege or not and keep those children in danger?
And the records are sealed, or they were destroyed, or they were, who knows, right?
Yeah. Well, they destroy all the calls at the end of every day, don't they?
Yeah, that's what it said in the AP article. I've had a number of conversations with various people about this case, and I am not a lawyer. It's one of those things where, when you have a situation where something, isn't entirely possible that the bishop was motivated by good intentions, that the attorneys and Kurt McConkie and the people on staffing the helpline were all motivated by good intentions, and that despite their good intentions, this continued to happen, that somebody misread the situation, received a bad report, misinterpreted the legal situation, whatever, and that this was maybe or that these were limited instances, that the vast majority of time the right thing was done. I work in the medical field. I know that humans make mistakes. Perfectly happy to discuss how humans make mistakes, and that even when we have policies and protocols and things set up in order to do the right thing, we make errors. It happens, right? The interesting thing is that when I make a mistake, the first thing that we do is we say, okay, how did we make this mistake? How did this happen? How do we correct our policy or our procedures so that we can prevent this from happening again? The last thing that we do, and if something becomes public, then the PR aspect from a healthcare organization would be, this misses the mistake that was made. This is what we did to correct it. We are reviewing our policies, and we are doing everything in our power to make sure that something like this never happens again.
Yeah.
And what is far more telling about this entire AP article is not what happened, but what is currently happening now. And the fact that the church, rather than standing up and saying, you know, this is a horrible thing and it never should have happened, and we are reviewing our policies and we are making sure that the people who are intervening in these areas are appropriately trained so that we make sure that children are not hurt. None of that is being done. And what is 100% is we did everything right. Everything is right. We're being persecuted. And it is absolutely it speaks volumes about the position of the church, because if the second church leaders have to correct themselves and say, we were wrong about this.
Oh yeah.
Then the house of marbles comes falling down. House of marbles, the house of dominoes, whatever. House of cards comes collapsing down, because it is all based on the illusion that these men are talking to God and that they do everything right. And
it's a joke. I mean, I'm a civil engineer, and at the end of every project, the final report is the lessons learned, you know, so that the next time we do a similar thing, we don't screw up the way we screwed up before. But they seem to never check, like never take 5 to be like, right, what went wrong there? You know, with this whole AP thing, I wonder if they're all sitting down, mulling it over and thinking, right, let's sit down and see what we could have done better, what lessons we can learn. Or if they're all just like, you know what, that's beneath me. There was inaccuracies and their timeline was wrong, and I know that I'm right. So
if I had to venture a guess, I would say that they absolutely are. Maybe not in the levels of, like, you know, the quorum of the 12, but in the administration levels, I would say they absolutely are reviewing and revising their policies. Because that's, you know, with Sam Young, right? Sam Young made a big stink about the policies within regarding interviews, and they excommunicated him, right? Because they had to they had to display a show of force that you don't mess with us, and they excommunicated Sam Young. And then what did they do? They changed their policy, right? Yeah. I have no doubt that there are policies being changed behind the scenes, but the difference is that they don't hold any accountability to either the members or the people that have been injured or the public at large, because they can't. Because if they sit there and say, hey, we did this wrong, then again, it calls into question their entire claim of being, you know.
Well, do you know?
Yeah. Anyway,
do you know Project Paperclip from World War II? Okay. So after World War II, there was loads of scientists that worked for the Nazis on like the V2 rockets and things. Von Braun, I think, the guy who did your. Yeah, he was one of them. Okay. And basically the Russians and the Americans wanted to scoop these guys up, and they wanted to get as many on their side as they could. So a bunch of German scientists were brought to America, and on their immigration forms, someone noticed that there was a paperclip indentation, like the paperclip had been there and then taken away. So the thing that it was sticking on was gone. And they noticed on all of these Germans coming over, they all had this paperclip indentation. So then someone tried to figure out what it was, and they figured out that it was their Nazi record that was on there and then taken off. And it was called Project Paperclip because it didn't come out until later. And these things had come, and these people had come and made great leaps in science in the US, but they'd done it off of the back of this secret kind of background. And I think it's the same with policy changes. It's like the paperclip held on the list of excommunicated members that it took to change the policy. And I think that's what they do, you know. They won't change until they're forced to, and then they don't reinstate people. So,
right. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, the bodies of the road to progress with the Mormon Church is littered with the bodies of excommunicated members who were, well, for sure.
If they can find me, they can excommunicate me.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, let's get into TikTok. Or how did you get into TikTok? How did you start Not the White Wizard?
So my name is Christopher Lee. So as a Brit, maybe you'll get it now.
Yes.
Not the White Wizard was the handle, and I thought it was kind of witty and crafty, and I'd be like, but everyone's gonna figure it out. I don't think
no one knows. Go on, can you tell the viewers?
Yeah, so the White Wizard is Sauron, the character from Lord of the Rings, who was portrayed and filmed by a great British actor, deceased British actor. His name was Christopher Lee, and it's funny because when I was a kid, someone came up and like, Christopher Lee, he's greatest Dracula of all time, and I was like, what are you talking about? I don't know who this is. This is Hammer Films and kind of probably cult classic status now. But I was like, oh, okay. And then when Lord of the Rings and the Star Wars prequels came out, and kind of Christopher Lee kind of got a resurgence as becoming kind of notable, and at least with popular films, I'd introduce myself. My name's Christopher Lee, like the actor, and they'd be like, who? And I'm like, forget about it. So I got into TikTok, primarily starting off with accident, but I had some interesting ideas regarding Mormonism, Mormon theology, and just kind of wanting a place where I can maybe vent some frustrations that I had about Mormonism, comment on some things. I don't know if I had as much of a goal of establishing a media presence or becoming, doing something that like what you're doing. More as I just kind of wanted to get something out there into the ether. And primarily, I think one of the earliest videos I did where I was talking about the role that Satan plays in Mormon theology and how specifically how he is completely. I think you have.
We're gonna get there.
But generally, I was like, this is an idea that I'd kind of come up with in my head, and I thought was maybe a little bit novel. And I wanted to kind of get it out there into the ether. So if anybody else ever came up with the idea, I could be like, hey, I had that idea, not to claim credit or anything, but just so it was out there. And so that was my first video or one of my early ones. I've since branched out my content to being a little bit more broad in terms of, when COVID was kind of in its heyday, I was working really hard to try to put out content that was educating the public regarding COVID and educating the public regarding the things about, science and more skeptical thought processes and things that maybe were reaching a broader audience. And really it's just things that I'm passionate about. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome. Well, let's see some of those things, I guess. Before we do, I came across you. I didn't come across TikTok really till like maybe the third lockdown over here. So maybe last year's lockdown. We've had so many, it's unreal. So, and when I first came across you, I think the first video I saw was you thanking everyone for like 20,000 followers overnight. And now you're at like 40,000 and absolutely killing it, which is amazing because TikTok's hard. Like I'm on TikTok, got like 1,800 followers, and I worked hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And the video that took me to like 20,000 followers was one that was kind of just a one-off, responding to some comment about, a family interaction. And then I woke up and I was like, oh wow, I've went from, 5,000 followers to 20,000 followers. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say to everyone now, before we get into it, let us know in the comments below if you're on TikTok, if you're following Not the White Wizard or even Priest of Dispatches. And if you're not, I'll put both links in the description below. Go and follow Not the White Wizard. And if you feel you can put it with any more of me, you can follow me as well. But I'm not important as kind of payment for being here and giving us his time. Not the White Wizard deserves maybe an extra 10,000 followers, and we'll see where it goes.
But let's get it to 60.
Yeah. Hey, the sky's the limit when it comes to TikTok.
The sky's the limit. That's right.
Cool. Let's take a look then. So the first video that I chose was your cringiest Mormon moment. which you had at BYU. Let's see the video and then we'll talk about it.
The cringiest thing you ever did as a Mormon?
So I was a chemistry student at Brigham Young University getting ready to apply to medical school, and I was sitting in one of the common areas in the chemistry building working on a project with a female classmate who confessed that she also wanted to go to medical school. At which point I gave her a very sanctimonious and holier than thou lecture, telling her how her duty to God was to get married and have children and raise those children at home, and that it was pretty much impossible for her to be a physician and be a mother, and that she really needed to check her priorities. I never spoke to her again after that. I graduated sometime after, and if you are out there, I am so sorry. And if you have been the victim of anybody who said anything like that to you, I am so sorry. I hope she achieved all of her dreams. It was so sexist of me, and it was definitely the cringiest thing I ever did as a Mormon.
Dude, that is so, when I saw that resonated with me, because I did a similar thing, not about being a mother, but I teased a sister missionary when I was a missionary about polygamy, because I knew that she couldn't deal with it. And I teased her about eternal polygamy and different things like that. And I'm like, I look back now, I'm like, you were such a patriarchal douchebag. But
the cringiest thing.
Not that I'm trying to defend anything ourselves, I guess. But there is this quote that's hidden under here, which is annoying. But this quote, young mothers and fathers will all, with all my heart, I counsel you not to postpone having your children. Be co-creators with the Father in heaven. Mothers who have enjoyed good health, have your children and have them early. Do not curtail the number of children for personal or selfish reasons. That was Ezra Taft Benson, 1987.
Yeah, I mean, when people talk to me about my experience as a Mormon, what I tell people, I was like, I was raised as a McConkie Mormon. I was raised as that Kimball, McConkie, Benson, Joseph Fielding Smith era Mormon. I read books like Mormon Doctrine and I read Mormon Doctrine and Doctrines of Salvation. All of these kinds of books that everyone would, the church leadership would very much like to just disappear and go under the rug. But those were my textbooks for what being a Mormon meant. And that exact quote was in our institute manual when I was in college. Yeah. I mean, it was I was the way I was because that is the way I was taught to be. And I think I've tried to track that person down on social media, and I sent them a message on social media. I never got a reply back, but there were so many moments like that, times where I said, just repeated verbatim, the official line that had come from somebody like Benson or Kimball. And
I've apologized to people on air like that I've not been able to find much like you did there, and it seems so silly making excuses for myself. But at the same time, when you grow up in that kind of paradigm and that milieu, if 10 years ago, PD from 10 years ago would have hated PD today, because I'm opposite ends of every spectrum going. Like, I'm not a raving liberal. I just believe that people have a right, to do what they want in their space and not be... The fact that I don't like what they're doing shouldn't stop them doing it if it's not hurting anyone, But when it comes to religion, I'm kind of the other way. I'm like, you say you're not hurting anyone, but you're putting these rules on people. So I've kind of flipped in different directions. And thankfully, that's one where I'm not stuck on.
Yeah, it informs how you think, it informs how you interact with each other, and it informs how you vote. So,
yes, absolutely. Well, people can vote with their thumbs right now. We want to get 300 likes on this video, and subscribe if you feel that you enjoyed it. But on with the videos. And you mentioned this just a few moments ago. This is a 4 or 5 part video, but we were talking about this before. And when I saw this, I was like, Chris is reading my mind. because I've discussed this with people before on the temple expose that we're doing right now. We've discussed this about Satan in the Garden of Eden. But let's see what you had to say about Satan being the hero of the plan of salvation.
So before we get into this, we need to break down what Mormons currently believe about the plan of salvation. The plan of salvation is essentially the answer to the questions: where did we live before we were born, and why are we here on earth, and what happens after we die? Now, Mormons believe that before we were born, we existed as spirits, and we lived in heaven with God, and God had a physical body and God power, and he wanted to share this God power with us and have us become like him. So he came up with this plan, and this plan involved us getting born on earth with physical bodies, living our lives, not being able to remember anything about our time up in heaven with God as spirits, and testing us to see how well we could keep his commandments. And if we did a great job of keeping his commandments and did all the things that we're supposed to do, after we die, we go back to live with him, except this time we have physical bodies and God power. That's the idea. However, God knew that we wouldn't be able to...
That's my technology fail. Let me just get us back to where we were.
Fix the problem when you mess up. So 2 people volunteered for this gig, and the first guy, Lucifer, raises his hand and says, hey, I am going to make it so that nobody messes up. I'm going to make it so that everybody does everything that they're supposed to do. They won't have a free choice, but I want all the glory. And God was not okay with this. And then the second guy raises his hand and says, my name is Jehovah, and I am going to do it, except I will make sure that everybody keeps their free agency. Not everyone is going to become like God, but I am going to teach people how to do it, and I'm going to save as many as I can, and God gets the glory. And God was on board with this plan. So what happened is Lucifer gets kicked out of heaven along with 1/3 of all of his spirit children, gets kicked out of heaven, and they are now on earth to tempt the human race. Okay, Satan is so mad about getting kicked out of heaven, he wants to tempt everybody to do evil so that they can't go back to live with God, so that they don't do the things that they're supposed to do, because all he wants to do is thwart and frustrate the plan of God. That is Satan's whole MO, and that's important because this is actually not the case. Now, so what we're doing here is we are going through our lives, trying our best, trying to do all the good Mormon things that we're supposed to do. Get baptized, go to the temple, go to church, read the Book of Mormon, pray every day, read all the scriptures, so that hopefully after we die, we will end up going to heaven and we get our perfect physical bodies, and we get our God power, and we can even build worlds, and we can even build our own planets, our own universes, and our own solar systems, just like God did. That is the summed up version of the Mormon plan of salvation.
What a brilliant synopsis.
It is 2.5 minutes, and so many books have been written about it, but that's all we needed.
So the funny thing is that when I made that video, I hadn't figured out how to edit. I hadn't figured out, so I think I had to run through that thing. I think I had like 20 takes. I kept either running over or running short or flubbing up too many words. And then I think it was shortly after that, I'm like, oh, I can pause and re-record and edit and splice it together. So the quality of my videos improved after that.
Hey, but the content is fantastic. So you said this was one of the first ones where you were like, I just need to get it out there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned there that I did a Facebook post where I tried to write this down a long time ago, and people didn't get it. So you doing it this way is much better. But one thing that I said, and I can't remember if you said it in a minute or not, but Jesus was the firstborn. Lucifer was the secondborn. Okay. Later on, you talk about patterned after old worlds and different things. Like the plan of salvation is not a new thing. The plan of salvation is supposed to be this, sausage factory that is just on a different world. And so my question would be, is the firstborn always the savior and the secondborn always Satan?
Great question.
Because no one wants to be the secondborn. If that is the case and he's always Satan, then he should be rewarded for, we'll see that. We'll get to, because I was just like,
yeah. and and it's important for anybody tuning into this that I don't believe any of this, but this kind of raises these types of questions of because I think that these questions were trying to be solved by Brigham Young when he's bringing out Adam God doctrine, and proponents of Adam God doctrine will say that, oh, Brigham Young really learned it from Joseph Smith, which is entirely possible because it's not such a huge departure from anything else that he came up with. It's not like Joseph Smith wasn't already known for completely retooling his doctrine when it suited him. But the idea of Adam God doctrine is that Jesus actually had already been on an earth and had already lived a life on earth and was perfect, all of that. There's so much there that it's impossible to unpack or know what Joseph was actually thinking at the time that, we don't know what the last thought that went through his head other than ow, my head from the bullet. But that's a bad joke. That's a bad joke.
You know what?
He wasn't shot in the head either. He wasn't shot in the face.
When you have like you sat on the toilet and you have like a gem of a thought. I do my best thinking on the throne, etc.
Sure.
And it turns out to be a great thing. I wonder how many doctrines that we argue about today were just like crap thoughts of Joseph or Brigham when they were sat on the toilet and they came out and they said to someone this thing that they thought about. So it'd be amazing. I know it's not possible, but it would be amazing if you could track back this massive part of Mormonism that wasn't supposed to be a big thought. It was just a brain fart.
Yeah.
And,
that's the Mormon history tour that I want to go on, is the various outhouses that Joseph Smith was sitting in when he came up with,
Yeah. That's the polygamy outhouse where he shook it more than twice. But
here's the barn. Yeah.
Let's head into the Garden of Eden with Satan.
So this is the second installment of my series on exactly why Satan is the hero of Mormonism. We talked about briefly in our previous video, just a brief outline on the plan of salvation. What we'll talk about now is the role that Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden play in this plan, and exactly how Satan makes his first move as our hero. Okay, so after God explains his plan to all of his spirit children in the pre-existence, he sends Jehovah to build earth. And so Jehovah does that. He builds earth and he plants the Garden of Eden, and in the Garden of Eden he places Adam and Eve, and God comes to Adam and Eve and he gives them two rules and then two commandments. And according to Mormonism, these two commandments are contradictory commandments, that God knows this, but Adam and Eve don't. And the two commandments specifically are multiply and replenish the earth, and do not eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Specifically, do not eat that tree. And he tells them that in the day you eat this, the day that you eat this, you will die. That's what he tells Adam and Eve. So he leaves Adam and Eve and they do their thing for God knows how long, okay? Now, what happens is, according to the Bible, according to the temple endowment ceremony, Satan shows up and tells Eve, eat the fruit, and says two things to her. He says, you're not going to die, and if you eat it, you will get the knowledge of good and evil. So Eve eats the fruit. She gives the fruit to Adam. Adam eats the fruit. God shows up, says, what are you doing? And Adam and Eve are standing there like, and so they get kicked out of the garden. They start fucking. Now, here's the deal. According to Mormon doctrine, Adam and Eve could not reproduce. They could not have children until after they had eaten the fruit. I don't know if that's a thing in other religions, but in Mormonism, that is a key point. That had they not eaten the fruit, they would not have been able to multiply and replenish the earth. That eating the fruit was absolutely necessary to God's plan to create physical bodies for all of the spirit babies. So all Satan had to do was nothing. Satan knows all of this. Specifically in the temple video, God comes up to Satan and says, what are you doing here, Satan? And Satan says, I'm doing that which has been done on other worlds, implying that Satan knows exactly what is going on. He has the playbook. He didn't get his memory scrambled like the rest of us did. Satan's sitting there and he's like, yeah, I know exactly what's going on. So if God tells Adam and Eve to not eat the fruit, and and by eating the fruit, it actually furthers his plan. All Satan had to do was nothing. He could have told them, he said, hey, whatever you do, don't eat the fruit. He could have just sat back and the entire plan would have been toast. But Satan didn't, because Satan is really the hero.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
go on.
A couple of thoughts about this. Now, I don't know if Dan Macklin follows your thing, and if you don't follow Dan, because he's a believing Mormon who's like a biblical scholar, and he's on TikTok and he does amazing content. And so if I get this wrong, Dan, I apologize. But the interesting thing is that the idea of the serpent being Satan is completely that is a Christian invention, or at least it's a very much later invention, that the serpent was actually a serpent, and the serpent plays kind of a hero role. God is actually trying to trick them to keep them in the garden, and he's giving them bad information, and the serpent is the one who comes in and says, no, you actually want to eat this fruit, and here's why. And the serpent is the hero in that Garden of Eden story, in terms of he plays a role very similar to who brings the fire, the Greek guy who brings the fire. Oh gosh, now I was going to say Pythagoras. Anyway, the guy in Greek mythology who brings fire to the humans. He
let us know in the comments.
Brings this technology. Starts with a P, and I'm blanking on it, but anyway, not Perseus. That's Medusa. Yeah, I'm blanking on it. Anyway,
okay.
So the point is that the serpent actually plays a role. He's a friend to the humans, and
yeah.
Hey, God's selling you up the river. You're not going to die, and they didn't. And he goes, you're going to get knowledge of good and evil, and they did. And so yeah, that's kind of the holdover from that. Anyway, so I'm not exactly sure when the whole idea of the serpent and Satan being the same person came into play, whether that was pre-Christian or post-Christian era, but that's where we're at.
Well, I'm not one for picking holes in Mormon theology, but it kind of falls apart in front of me is what happens. But on this note, we must have known the difference between good and evil before we came to this life, because we needed to know the differences in order to choose the correct plan. Otherwise, we all would have just been like a bunch of, I don't know, we just followed whatever God said. Because surely that's what we were. We were just following whatever God said. And so then we come through the veil and we can't get any of that back. He presents them with the catch-22, and Eve figures it out first. Now, when you go down Mormon history, there will be people who never could have imagined that the new and everlasting covenant of marriage and polygamy would be done away with, and that 100 years later, there would be a specific committee, Strengthening Church Members Committee, designed to root out polygamists. Okay, there's a specific committee to stop people practicing what they believe to be the new and everlasting covenant of celestial marriage. Essential to salvation, right? Essential to exaltation, absolutely. Yeah. There'll be people who never would have believed that 100 years later, blacks would have got the priesthood in 1978. Before, Brigham Young said they would when all the sons of Adam have had the opportunity. Okay, and there's still sons of Adam apparently coming to the earth. People would roll over in their graves from the 1800s who heard that's a thing now, and there are all of these things that the church has done 100 years post the belief. And I'm just going to say that maybe in 100 years, and people, they can't get on board with this right now, and they're like, that'll never happen. I don't think you can say in the church that'll never happen, because a lot of stuff that had never happened has now happened. But one of them could be a realignment of the plan of salvation, where Satan doesn't get any praise, but the role of Satan is seen as more of an essential role, and it's less vilified, so that he is still the bad guy, but people understand that he will inherit his own kind of reward in the next life for the role that he played. I don't know how they'll twist it, but I'm saying 100 years.
I would disagree with you on that for one reason, that all the changes that I've seen within Mormon doctrine have come as a result of social pressure, because those issues affected actual people. And I don't see a whole lot interesting coming from the Mormon church in terms of theology. I think that stopped with Brigham Young.
You don't know.
I think
the Republican Party could one day say, we will revoke your tax exempt status unless you give demon rights.
Fair point. I don't know. You're absolutely right. It's one of the biggest frustrations of Mormon theology is that so much of it now is becoming we don't know.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of interest coming from these guys other than pray, pay, and obey.
Well, the more prophets we have, the less we know.
That's true.
So let's see what else you had to say. Satan tempts us because he loves us.
So this is my next video on my series explaining how Satan is the hero within Mormon theology. So in the last video, we talked about how the role that Satan played in the Garden of Eden, specifically telling Adam and Eve to do exactly what God wanted them to do, which basically set the entire plan of salvation in motion. My point being that if Satan really wanted to destroy God's plan, he would have just done nothing. So moving on from there, Adam and Eve get kicked out of the garden. They start having sex. They start making babies. Eventually, the entire world is filled with population, and Satan is going around trying to tempt people to sin, tempt people to break God's law. And the idea is that Satan is so mad at God, he hates all of us, and he just wants us to fail and not go and return to live with God. Satan wants us to fail. He is trying to sabotage God's plan by preventing us from going back to heaven. Except none of this adds up, because in the Book of Mormon, we learn from Lehi that that there needs to be opposition in all things. That is absolutely essential, that in order for us to progress and become like God, we have to have some opposition, trying to prevent us from becoming like God. Satan is a necessary aspect of this process, is what we learn from the Book of Mormon. And so essentially, Satan's temptations are the weight that we use to build up our spiritual muscles. What this means is, again, like before, if Satan really wanted to sabotage God's plan, then the way to do it would be to stop tempting us. Because if we stopped tempting us, we would never develop, we would never grow, we would never build our spiritual muscles and become like God. Satan knows this, remember. Satan has the playbook. He knows exactly what God is wanting to do. He is going around tempting us, giving us this challenge, this difficulty, so that we can actually become better, so that we can become more like God. And so Satan's on our side. He's there to help us. Getting mad at Satan for tempting us, or blaming Satan for tempting us, or viewing Satan as the villain is like a bodybuilder going into the weight room and looking at the weight as the villain. Like the weight is something to be villainized, when actually the weight is a very important tool that helps the bodybuilder do exactly what he's going into the gym to do. So, again, Satan is going around tempting us, trying to get us to break God's commandments for the express purpose of getting us to learn how to keep God's commandments in the face of temptation. And the reason Satan is doing this is because Satan is really the hero.
Now, any Mormon that's watching right now is thinking, man, these guys are Satan worshippers. But we're not. We're just pointing out a flaw in the story, and that it doesn't hang together. Now, all I was picturing there was baseball, what do they call it? The World Series final. You want to be the guy that's going to hit the home run to win the game, but you can't hit the home run unless the other team's pitcher throws the ball. And that's like the whole Satan thing that you were just describing there. Without Satan throwing you the ball, you can't win those celestial points by knocking it out of the park.
Right.
So yeah,
right. And then sitting there and saying that Satan, the pitcher, his goal is to sabotage the game and to ruin the game. You know, that's his goal. And the other interesting aspect that I hadn't thought of until later was, you know, going back to the whole pre-existence thing. God presents his plan and he says, but don't worry, you guys aren't going to be perfect at being able to keep the commandments. Well, why not, God? Oh, well, because we're going to have this guy tempting you and trying to get you to do everything wrong. So don't worry, that's already baked into the plan. But what point of Jesus, what point is there of a Jesus or a savior figure if you don't have someone tempting people to do sin?
Yeah.
You know,
like people go on about God sending trials and things in order to test people so that they can become better. You get stronger through your trials and different things like that. Right. But it's exactly the same, like you say, you know, you get stronger by resisting temptation. You know, who was going to come to Jesus when he was fasting and tempt him if it wasn't Satan? You know, was one of his other brothers and sisters going to be like, oh, I'm noticing that no one's like giving any opposition, so we need to put together a committee and decide how we're going to make this plan work, because it's all just broken down a bit because Lucifer's taken a day off, you know.
Right. And you know, it's funny because I've heard people respond to this, and they you know, believing Mormons have responded to this, and they've said, oh, well, Satan, you know, he's just so angry, he just wants to destroy everything, and he doesn't care about whether or not it makes sense or whether it works. He just wants to smash things. And I'm like, yeah, except that you don't get to say that on one hand and then, you know, refer to him as being cunning, laying snares, being patient, being careful and waiting, you know, the flaxen cords, like you don't get to have both of those. And so, and the reality is that Satan is the boogeyman. Satan is the boogeyman to explain, to scare kids and to scare infantilized adult people. But when you look at it in terms of actual, you know, what is Satan's motivation? Why would he do this? And how would he actually accomplish what he's been doing? It doesn't add up, which is,
And you know, you got to imagine in the plan of salvation, it speaks in Abraham or Moses, I can't remember which one, about the noble and great ones. Okay. So the noble and great ones, and they'd say, you know, all the prophets down the dispensations were these noble and great ones, but above them were Satan and Jesus Christ. So if you imagine all these people you revere and then say, oh, well, Satan's just so angry that he's just like, he's blinded by his anger and different things. You're like, no, he's even better apparently than your prophets that you would kiss the feet of. You know, he's only second to God and Jesus Christ.
With that, and I would say, and I think I get into the next video, I would say that he's even better than Jesus. According to Mormon theology, he beats Jesus with respect to what he's actually sacrificing. He takes the cake. What we're told is that Jesus sacrificed himself for us, right? He suffered, he died in the garden, and he suffered all of the pains so that we could be redeemed, right? So we talk about the sacrifice of Jesus. This is common in Christianity, but let's look at exactly what that sacrifice is. That sacrifice consisted of a few hours of physical pain, physical discomfort, okay? Not even the worst crucifixion. Crucifixion typically lasted for days, okay? To die from crucifixion took hours to days. Whereas his crucifixion lasted hours, according to the scripture. So we're talking about less than 24 hours of physical pain. He dies, he stays dead for a day and a half, and then he's resurrected. And after he's resurrected, what happens to him? He ascends up into heaven. He's sitting on the right hand of the Father. He has all that the Father hath. He's inherited all of this glory as a result of the sacrifice. Jesus has it pretty good, okay? When it comes down to, if someone came up to me and says, hey, would you suffer some horrible, horrible physical pain and discomfort and a gruesome way to die? Not the most gruesome way to die, but just a pretty gruesome way to die. But in exchange, you get literally everything. that's a good deal. I'd take that deal.
Yeah.
Lucifer, Satan, on the other hand, at least according to Scripture, when Jesus returns, he takes Satan and he throws him into outer darkness. So if everything that I've said is true, is that Satan is actually on our side, and that he's actually working to further God's plan in order to tempt us so that we have an opposition. He's moving the plan forward. He's doing all of this. Number one, he's not getting any credit for this. Nobody is singing his praises. Nobody's singing hymns about him. Nobody's thanking him, right? This is all a thankless task. And then at the end of it, what does he get? He goes into what the Mormons refer to as outer darkness, which is their version of hell for all eternity. Okay. Satan is literally sacrificing his eternity for us. Jesus sacrificed a weekend. So the gist here is that between the two, Satan is absolutely the sacrificial hero in this story, and the one who is absolutely the object or the deserving object of all of this veneration that Mormons are reserving for Jesus, because Satan is the one who's really taking the brunt of all of it. And I would say that I would, in my imagination, I would say that this meeting back in the pre-existence probably went something where God pulls Satan aside and says, "Hey, look, we need someone to fill this job. It's going to be a thankless job, but if you really love your brothers and sisters, you're going to have to go down and do this." And Satan goes down and says, "I will go and do it for them." And so he goes and he does and fills this role so that he can be villainized and vilified and then ultimately kicked into outer darkness. Maybe Jesus will show up and say, "Hey guys, you're just kidding. Satan was, in on it the whole time." But, it's all made up anyway.
Dude, why didn't Jesus just go buy Satan like a 5-week cruise of Kolob Falls or whatever and be like, look, the world is a better place because I sent him on a 5-star cruise like around the Milky Way?
It's,
Yeah. Well, something else that Satan gave us is the theory of evolution. And that is something that you've spoken about, something that...
Heavy metal.
And heavy metal, yeah. Oh, what a guy. What a guy.
I know.
So I saw this video where you speak about BYU. And obviously you went to BYU and you did medicine at BYU. So, and I've always had this thought, like, how does BYU teach science fact that disagrees with church doctrine? And we'll see from your video how they do. But Ezra Taft Benson in 1970 said there is more than one reason why the church is advising our youth to attend colleges close to their homes, where institutes of religion are available. It gives the parents the opportunity to stay close with their children, and if they have become alert and informed, as President McKay admonishes us last year, these parents can help expose some of the deceptions of men like Sigmund Freud, Charles Darwin, John Dewey, Karl Marx, John Keynes, and others. If your children are taught untruths on evolution in the public schools or even in our church schools, provide them with a copy of President Joseph Fielding Smith's excellent rebuttal in his book, Man, His Origins and Destiny. And so let's play the video and then we'll talk about it.
Did anyone else have experiences like that at BYU or BYU Idaho or whatever?
So I attended Brigham Young University in the early 2000s. I was applying to medical school. I was a science major, so I took a lot of biology and chemistry classes. And yeah, my professors at Brigham Young University taught evolution as though it were fact. The other professors, not so much, but the science professors absolutely taught evolution as though it were a thing. And I was raised as a McConkie Mormon. Evolution was absolutely a doctrine of the devil, according to the way I was brought up. So going to BYU, sitting, listening to these professors talk about organic evolution, I thought I was in the twilight zone, but they presented their evidence. Their evidence was compelling, and I actually came to accept evolution. Interestingly enough, it was the scientific education at Brigham Young University, along with the logical and rational thinking skills that I gained while there, that actually ended up leading me out of the church. So, fuck you, church. Your university actually taught me how to become an ex-Mormon.
Awesome. But it boggles my mind. It doesn't take much to do that, but that on one side of the campus, they're teaching evolution as fact, because that's what it is, okay?
Yeah.
That there was, yes, there are a lot of things that we'll never know, but there is a certain pattern that we can see that has been scientifically tested, and that we see all through, time of evolution, of creatures adapting to their surroundings in order to survive, and natural selection, different things like this. But then on the other side of the campus, they're teaching about, young Earth theory and just total like loggerheads with one another, and blows my mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because the church, Brigham Young University exists for one reason, and it's so that parents in the church can send their kids to get a university education and get a degree without them being seriously challenged, without the indoctrination that they've spent so much time and effort instilling into their children to be seriously challenged. That being said, BYU's history is rife with this push and pull between academics and church dogmatism. And that tug of war has gone back and forth, and it's really kind of an interesting history at which times when they brought professors in. I think there was an interesting story that I heard on one of the podcasts that I listened to, where they talked about how they brought in these professors early in BYU's history to really make it a good university. And these people were coming in and teaching very secular ideas, and they were like, nope, you can't do that. And they quickly fired them. I think when Joseph Fielding Smith was at the head of the church, there was a lot more pushback against this type of stuff. It's interesting to me, if someone were to write a book and be able to get into what's going on in these back rooms in church headquarters, and how do these, because I sat in, and they teach evolutionary biology. They have an evolutionary biology track where they're teaching evolutionary biology. And when I say they teach evolutionary biology, they don't teach an atheistic worldview. And I would say that they they probably give the classes, they don't sit there and say, oh, this happens without God, but more like evolution is the process by which God creates, It doesn't jive with a strict interpretation of biblical accounts, but they just kind of hand wave it. So there's no point where there's a professor saying, hey, we don't, this happens without God, or life from lifelessness, or anything like that. But it's very much like, these are the nuts and bolts and the facts about evolution. This is how the model works. At no point in any of my science education was I ever given anything remotely resembling a young Earth creationist model of the universe outside of a religion classroom. So now I can't speak for BYU Idaho. I know that BYU Idaho is a lot more fundamentalist than BYU Provo is, but that was my experience there, and whether that's still consistent with everything else, I couldn't say. But the one thing that I do kind of stick up for is that when people kind of criticize the level of education at BYU, I am very quick to say, look, the atmosphere is toxic. The culture is toxic. There's a lot of reasons to not go to BYU. However, from an education standpoint, BYU was way harder than medical school was. BYU was so hard and so strenuous that when I went to medical school was a snap compared to how rigorous. Yeah, particularly the chemistry department. Those guys did not play. So anyway, well, Brian Woodfield, if you're listening to this, yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking back to the Temple movie, right? And now they don't have the movie. Now it's just a slideshow.
Is that right? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now it's just death by PowerPoint. But
Jesus.
The movie at the beginning where the Earth is being created, that always sat well with me, because I was of a similar thought that science is just man discovering some of the ways of God. And when the earth is being created and they're putting the water there and the animals and different things. And you see almost like artists' drawings from drafts then becoming colored pictures and then moving animals. And some of the things that they actually draw are these ammonites from 140 million years ago. I dug this one up last week from the from the Yorkshire coast with my kids, and I'm just cleaning some of them up. But it's there in the Temple movie. But then later on, we talk about death, mortal death entering the earth 6,000 years ago, which would mean that this could not have lived and died on this earth. But then it's saying that this was on this earth. So it would basically, to square that circle, it would need to be that this was only 6,000 years old.
Which is why you create a partition in your intellect, and you only think about Mormonism on this side and only think about evolution on this side, and never the twain shall meet. So you're absolutely right. There's no way to reconcile an organic evolution with a literal interpretation of the creation account in Genesis. There's just no way to reconcile it and there's a lot of other churches that have come around and they've said, hey, this is just a myth. This is a creation story. It is not the actual creation. But Mormonism really, really, really loves evangelical Christianity and really, really, really wants to be a part of that club. And until they divorce themselves from that idea, there's no way to reconcile those two things.
Yeah, Russell Nelson said.
I think this one's my next, one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite anecdotes.
Okay, let's take a look.
When I was in college, I took a biology course talking about evolution. And having been raised a Mormon in the Bible Belt, this was my first time taking a course that really dived deep into that subject. I knew nothing about evolution. In fact, I believed that evolution was a doctrine of the devil because that's what I'd been taught. This professor took his time and laid out the evidence in favor of evolution. We talked about Darwin and his observations. We talked about the fossil record, the age of the earth, anatomical similarities, embryological similarities, genomic similarities. We talked about DNA and the process in which it replicates and how that replication allows mutations to occur and how those mutations accumulate over time and result in new characteristics, which is how we get new species. And we talked about how evolution ties all the branches of biology together. And at the end of the course, I believed it. The argument that he made was so convincing and the evidence that he presented was so compelling that I realized that I had been wrong about evolution. And from that point, I accepted evolution as fact. And I was convinced because of evidence. And 20 years later, I still believe in evolution, which again is interesting because I was not brought up to believe it as a child. I didn't go to weekly evolution meetings. I don't pray to Darwin. I'm not reading Origin of the Species on a daily basis, or really any evolution articles for that matter. I am never expected to bear testimony about my belief in evolution. No scientist or evolutionist has ever told me that I need to accept the principles of organic evolution by natural selection on faith. The reason I continue to believe in evolution is because thus far no one has been able to present a reasonable, rational argument as to why it would be false. And here's the rub. If something is true, it should be able to be supported by evidence and sound reasoning. If the only way you can convince your children that something is true is by indoctrinating them from a very young age, preventing them from having access to contrary information, having them recite or memorize tenets of the belief system without really understanding what they're talking about, if you have to instill in your children a fear of some kind of internal punishment if they don't believe what you're telling them, then what you believe isn't true. And you're hurting your kids, and you need to stop.
The more we know. Yeah.
So true. Well, that was your evolution testimony right there. So if people say he bore his testimony of evolution, you did it right there. But I totally agree with you.
I should have cried. If I had cried, it would have been better. And it's funny, like the music, the background, like I figured out how to put music with my videos. This was one of those things that is so frustrating to me with this kind of childhood indoctrination. Kind of goes back to what I said about how the reason BYU exists, and that's because Mormons know They know exactly why. They know exactly that if they don't get their kids early, and if they don't get them, read your scriptures, say your prayers, read your scriptures every day, say your prayers every day, bear your testimony. Don't hang out with people who don't believe. Don't watch things that disagree with our religion. Don't listen to things that disagree with our religion. Only consume media that reinforces this narrative. That's the only way their kids will continue to believe it. And Mormons know this. They know this. And that's why, probably the hardest point in my wife and I, in our marriage was when we were not on the same page from a religious standpoint. And the biggest fear that you have as a believing parent when your spouse leaves the church is, what are our kids going to do? Because every single Mormon knows that if their kids have an option between going to church and not going to church, they're most likely going to pick not church, because church is a drag and it's boring and it doesn't offer you anything that's really stimulating. I love evolution. I mean, I love reading about science, even in my spare time. And we were talking before about reading these books that talk about things like history and the backgrounds of ethnicities. This is stuff that interests me, that I read for pleasure. I never participated in Mormonism out of any kind of real pleasure. It was always a duty. And so when you are comparing something, I'm studying this, I'm learning about this because I actually find it interesting, I actually can find it compelling. And that was kind of the dichotomy I was trying to draw with this video, is that I took a class. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I took a class on evolution, and that class presented the evidence so well because it was at BYU. So he knew exactly who his audience was. He was like, these are people who are coming in here, they don't believe in evolution, so we have to lay this out. So he laid it out so impeccably well that I was like, oh wow, there's really not a good. And aside, there was a point when I raised my hand and I was like, I thought I was a smart guy because I was, this was a class I'd taken, but I'd already taken a lot of science classes. And I'm like, yeah, man, but these aren't reproducible results. And what are you predicting here? Science has to give you predictable, reproducible results. Yeah. How is evolution doing this? And he said, great question. And he was telling me about because we can look and we can say, okay, we have a species A here, we have species B here. So that means there should be some transitional species here. It should have these characteristics, and we should be able to find it at this level of strata in these areas on the map. And then we go looking, and then we find it. And he showed me multiple examples where this had been done multiple times over, right? And I was like, oh, and he goes, that's how we reproduce it. Yes, you're right. We can't reproduce the process of evolution on the scale, on the time scale that we're talking about. But what we can do is we can make predictions about what types of fossils we'll find and where we'll find them. And that pays off all the time because we find the fossils. And I was like, oh, wow. And that was the moment. And since then, I haven't done a ton of reading on new evolutionary research other than, occasional headlines and things like that. It's not my field. Yeah. But there's never been a point where Mormons will say, oh, well, if you're not constantly going to church, if you're not constantly reading, if you're not constantly immersing yourself in Mormonism, your testimony is going to gradually ebb away. Why doesn't that happen with science? Yeah. It doesn't. Because once the case has been made, now if someone were to come along to me and they were going to say, hey, look, what we thought we knew about science in the past, here's new evidence that shows that what we thought was actually wrong. Now this is what what our model currently says. Great. Now I know. And now I can adjust my, I'm not married. I'm not dogmatically married to the idea of evolution being true. I'm perfectly happy to revise my opinion on evolution or quantum physics or any other, scientific idea the second someone provides evidence to convince me.
Yeah, it's like for science to change, it takes a landslide of new scientific discovery, often that comes about by new technology and new procedures or new ways in order to analyze things. Whereas in the church, for it to change, it just takes a little bit of social pressure and maybe the threat that they're going to lose some money. But the whole evolution thing, fossils, I, much like yourself, believed everything for a long time. And even when I was a bishop and stuff, I used to think, well, there are guys, I'd look to my stake president and be like, he is much smarter than me. He knows the scriptures more than me, and he's okay with all this. So I'm going to be okay with it. And then I went back to university later in life, and I did my civil engineering, but then I did a master's in engineering geology. I'd never really looked at geology, but in doing the master's in geology, I was taught about, how the earth became the way that the earth is. And then we looked at all those processes that created the earth and how you can look at the ground and understand how things moved, how things are going to continue to move, where the fossils come from, how things become fossilized. And it just blew my mind. And then at that point, pre-Adamites, I made excuses and did mental gymnastics to try and explain it all. And then I said to my brother-in-law, who was a scriptorian and stuff, I'm like, look, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that there was life before 6,000 years ago, and that what they're talking about is just putting the first spirits of Heavenly Father into these bodies of Adam and Eve. And he just said, he took me to the book of Moses, I think, and said, look, in the temple we learned that Eve is literally the mother of all living. And he said, so that's it. Eve is the mother of all living. And with that, my shelf blew apart. And I was like, okay, no, it's bullshit then.
Yeah. I remember early when my shelf broke, and it was probably one of those kind of just eureka moments where I said, there hasn't been a single instance where religion has been able to disprove science. It has always been the other way around. And every time science has been disproved or revised, it has always been by doing more science. At no point did science and religion ever disagree, and science ended up having to, as scientific progression progressed, it progressed towards the religious belief. It has always been going the other direction. And once I kind of pictured that, I was like, yeah, so if I'm going to sit here and say, which one is more reliable? If the two don't agree, which one is more reliable? It's definitely the scientific method is going to be a better method for getting me to what's actually going on. Yeah, that was a moment for me.
Well, I found this one on your TikTok. Joseph Smith is a piece of shit, and obviously attracted me to it. But that being the fact that you give a really, really good list of reasons why Joseph Smith is a piece of shit. Now, if anyone is new to TikTok, you'll see TikTokers and they'll have this speech bubble above their heads because what this is TikTok gives you the opportunity, which I think is an amazing tool, to reply to people's comments with videos. So you're not just having the whole keyboard warrior. You do it face to face. Like, they don't reply to you with a video, but you reply to them with a video. You've replied to this person because they've said Smith served a lot longer than 2 years, went through a lot of hell, got sent home early with a bullet, and people are still talking shit about him. I think that's referring to some of the stuff he did on Missionaries. But holy hell, the list you come up with here should be written down and taken to the doors of the Salt Lake Temple and hammered on. Who was it that did that?
Martin Luther, yeah.
Martin Luther, yeah. Martin Luther style. Let's take a look.
So if by served you mean convincing his neighbors in Palmyra that he could find buried treasure, using the same rock and a hat that he used to translate the Book of Mormon, but of course he never found any treasure. Of course that didn't stop him from taking the money for saying that he could find the buried treasure. And then eventually the heat got so bad he had to run away to Kirtland, where he wasted no time in setting up an illegal bank, and prophesied that the bank would never fail and would actually consume all other banks, and used his religious position to convince his followers to invest in the bank, after which the bank failed. And then when his justifiably angry followers came to get their money, he ran out of town to Missouri, where he wasted no time in waging an illegal war against the state government, for which he was legally arrested, but figured out a way to escape. Of course, all of this was called persecution. So he makes his way to Nauvoo, where he buys up a whole bunch of land on credit so that he can then sell that land back at inflated prices to his followers, who only went to Nauvoo because Joseph told them to. And then he told them to put off taking care of their own needs because he really needed a nice house to live in, which they needed to build for free. Oh, and let's not forget that while he was doing all of this, he was marrying upwards of 30 to 40 women, including other men's wives, underage women, sister pairs, mother and daughter pairs, all behind Emma's back and while denying it to the general public. And when some of his most trusted followers found this out and published a newspaper reporting what was actually going on behind the scenes, Joseph Smith used his position as mayor of Nauvoo to illegally destroy the printing press. So much for the First Amendment, am I right? Which is actually what led to his death. But you are right, people are still talking shit about him, and rightly so.
That should be, like, the title of the document is Joseph Smith is a piece of shit, and the document itself is just a transcription of that video.
It's so triggering to look over those things and find the parallel with a certain other very charismatic person with a cult-like following that we're dealing with in our country at this point. The list of horrible things that he did and said, and the way he used his position of power to, I mean, when you go through and read Doctrine and Covenants as a non-believer, it is 100% and this person needs to give me money, and this person needs to give me money, and this person also needs to give me money, and this person needs to stop complaining about these things that I did, or else he's going to go to hell. I mean, it is 100% a self-serving pile of garbage, and the fact that it's just not painfully obvious to everybody reading it just speaks to how deep that indoctrination is.
Yeah, and my only comment will be the land speculation should, for anyone who is shocked by the money that the church has, they are just copying the same kind of MO of land speculation, because
absolutely
Joseph bought the land on credit, said to everyone, hey, come here, knowing that an influx of people would increase the demand. So capitalism, what happens when the supply remains the same and the demand goes up, the price goes up. So he can then sell it to his people, pay off his creditors, and pocket the difference. Okay? So he's on. Yeah.
Kingdom of Nauvoo by Benjamin Park is an amazing book and just lays it all out there.
But the church still does this today.
Absolutely.
With Ancestry.com and the Blackstone Group, and the way that they've taken the shares in they took, before they bought out of the whole DNA testing thing, surprise, surprise, a few months before, they took out a big position in shares against the lab, the company that would be the lab that would get the contract to do all the DNA tests for Ancestry.com. So, surprise, surprise, when they got that contract, and Ancestry.com isn't owned by the church, it's owned by a separate company, but the church owns a big stock position against that company that owns Ancestry.com. But it all just connects. It's like, oh, we know that contract's going to go there, so we're going to take a stock position against it, so that in 3 months' time, when we announce this, all of these dominoes are going to fall, and we're going to make bank. And it's insider trading, but who's going to stand up to them and say that was dodgy as hell?
Particularly when you don't have to reveal your financial records.
Well, yeah,
which they don't.
Well,
a similar thing goes on with sorry, I'm making an accusation with no direct evidence, right? So I'm prefacing this, and the reason I don't have, maybe somebody's able to go through and do the digging on this. But why does the church continue to build temples? What financial benefit? I am jaded enough at this point that I'm convinced that the church doesn't do anything unless there is sufficient monetary reason. There has to be sufficient payoff to them. But when you think about it, every time a temple is built, right, there's the building of the temple. There's the moving of money from church tithing coffers to the pockets of people who are building the temples, furnishing the temples, decorating the temples, etc. Right? There's land purchases, and then there's all of the little neighborhoods around. Right? What's going to happen to all of the little neighborhoods around, and what's the value, particularly in the Utah, Idaho, Morador region of the country, where there's a significant Mormon population?
Yeah,
I would be very unsurprised if there were leaders of the church who had significant stakes, or had family members who had significant stakes, or connections who had significant stakes in construction companies and furniture companies and land deals and real estate deals and investment actions, and that we know exactly where this temple, it doesn't take a lot. We know exactly where the temple is going to be built. So we're going to go and buy up all the lots here so that we can go and flip those lots, so that we can develop and build developments around here, so that we can make sure that the right people are making money off of this thing. Because you can't just go and pay, this is why when the church says, oh, well, the general authorities, they don't get paid. Well, they do get paid, but they only get paid like, $150,000 or $250,000 a year. And for and I love how the church says for a board, for a person sitting on a director's board of a major company, that's not a lot, which it isn't. And to be fair, it is not a lot, but that's not talking about what do they get paid in expense-free credit cards, and business deals and insider trading, and being able to sit on boards of all of these other companies that they sit on, and these kind of off the books things that they all participate in.
And being able to sit on those boards until you die.
Sure.
Like you'd retire in the real world. Eventually you would retire. Okay.
Right.
And these guys, was President Nelson, like 96, 97, whatever he is. And you're like, man, you would have retired a long time ago, but you're living at large on the widow's mite. But when it comes to the temples, I'm just like, there is no rhyme nor reason to where he's announcing them other than shock factor for me. Because here in the UK, they just announced another one in Birmingham, which is right in the middle of the two that we've already got. But there's still a whole portion of the country in Scotland and Ireland, which is obviously separate to the UK. Let's not go there. But those saints have to go to Preston or London. And I think they go to Preston, and it's like a whole overnight trip. Some of them even have to fly. Okay. Why didn't they build a temple? If they're just handing them out like Oprah, you have a temple, you have a temple. Why didn't they put one in Scotland? Why didn't they put one in Ireland? They've announced them in fucking China and Russia, where they'll never be built, But we want to announce it because it's like, everyone will be like, wow, China. And then China's just like, what do you want about? But yeah, it's nuts. He's announced 100 now.
Yeah.
So
he's announced as many. I remember when it was such a big deal as a kid when we built our 100th temple, and we were like, temples are dotting the earth, and now we just announce them. It's a lot cheaper to announce them. You still get the PR credit, you still get all the perks, but you don't have to. It's just silliness now. I think with temples, the biggest thing that kind of shocked me when you leave the church is how inconsequential and even unremarkable they are to people who aren't in the church. Like just like, people see our temples and they love them and they wonder, what kind of building is that? How could I go in? And people are like, well, you mean that gaudy, ugly monstrosity in the middle of down or in the suburb outside of Indianapolis? That thing? Oh yeah, I've driven past that. That's really, really weird looking, man. What's up with that building? Nobody's really impressed with them except Mormons. Yeah,
they're just landmarks. Like when I speak to people and they talk about them, in the Preston one's right on the side of the motorway, and for people who live nearby, it's just a landmark. Like you go past the Jesus Castle, and then get off at that exit after the Jesus Castle, and everyone knows. Like, oh, that's the Jesus Castle.
Gotcha. Right, because England isn't known for a lot of architectural landmarks. There's not a whole lot of those around England or Europe in general. Yeah. So it's a good thing that there's temples around so that people can say, the Jesus Castle. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Well, I wanted to look at mission stuff because, it's amazing. So this is one that's been quite current in Mormondom or ex-Mormon blogosphere at the moment, choosing to go on a mission and whether we actually choose. So I just wanted to hear what you'd said about it and then discuss it briefly with you.
So as a young man in my early 20s, I chose to serve as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Was I put under extreme pressure by my parents to serve a mission? Yes. Was I led to believe that one of the worst things that I could do as a child was not serve a mission? Also yes. And was I explicitly told that if I didn't go on a mission that I would have a hard time finding a good Mormon girl who would want to marry me? Also yes. But did my parents effectively communicate to me that going on a mission was 100% my choice, and that if I didn't want to go, that they would still love me just the same? No. But that doesn't mean that going on a mission wasn't my choice. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And I just, before we move on, for anyone out there saying that this is an extreme like example, that was just your experience, it was my experience as well, but that it was. Have you heard the Jeffrey R. Holland talk at the Missionary Training Center
about don't you dare go home? That one.
Yeah. For anyone that's not heard it,
so as a young man,
let's just quickly. Because this is just drastic.
I hope there's no one within the sound of my voice go home. That just comes to me. It makes me wonder whether there's someone here who does want to go home, because that wasn't even remotely in my mind. I don't know who you are. And I don't know how seriously you're entertaining the thought. But don't you ever go home. Don't you dare leave this place. Not for God's sake, not for the church's sake, not for President Hinckley's sake. Somehow, I think they can probably handle it. But don't you dare leave here for your sake. I have lived on and off in my general authority life. I have come in contact around the world with missionaries who did not see their mission through. I'm not talking about medical releases or emergencies or tragedies. I'm talking about somebody who just said, I don't like doing this, it's too hard, and I'm going home and let my mother take care of me. I have met those people around the world. And if there is a more sorrowful, if there is a more anguished, and in a sense, if you promise not to misunderstand me, if there is, in a sense, a more pitiable group in all the world, I do not know who it is. Now that's strong language. That's really strong language. But I told you before, my mission means everything to me. I would wrestle you to the floor. I'd pull the curtains down. I'd get chains. I don't know, is there something around here that we tie people with? I don't see anything to tie people with. I'd rip the cords off the television camera to keep you here. Not for our sake, not for, you think one little missionary and 58,000, that isn't gonna bring the church to its knees, but it's gonna ruin your life. If you don't do the best thing you've ever had a chance to do, however hard it is, and however hard it may yet be.
What an absolute knobhead.
Yeah. The thing with this audio recording is that he's actually right, but the first thing you have to ask is why? Why would it be such a bad thing for a missionary to come home early, if not for the absolute toxic expectation that has been put in place and the toxic culture that has been built? And active believing Mormons will say, oh, well, that's church culture. And I'm like, where do you think church culture comes from? This doesn't come from a vacuum. It comes specifically because of statements like this. Yeah. So, because you're absolutely right. If a believing Mormon came home early on his mission and that guy wanted to go to BYU, probably wouldn't get into BYU. number one. Number two, how successful would they be in finding a good Mormon girl to marry? Have a hard time, right? Because all the Mormon girls have been told that number one on your list should be they're a returned missionary. And how successful would they be in the church? And then they'd spend their entire life in the church hearing, everybody say, oh, well, when I was on my mission, oh, where did you serve on your mission? Oh, well, I didn't go, or I came home early, right? So yes, absolutely. I would say that within the context of the church and what you are expected to be within the church, that is absolutely ruined if you go home on your mission early. And if it doesn't ruin it, it definitely casts a weight, because I don't know. I think I talked about this in one of my TikTok videos. I did come home on my mission early. And I don't know if that's one of the videos you have. So if it is, and we're talking about that, I'm okay.
No, go for it.
Later. Yeah. So, I mean, the gist was, I went on my mission and I hooked up with a girl. And it was one of those things that was just kind of, I got a little stir crazy in my apartment, left my apartment in the middle of the night while my companion was sleeping, ran into a girl. We started hanging out. One thing led to another. And to quote Seinfeld, yada, 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 I was sent home the next day. I went, but the point is that at the time, I mean, I engaged in a consensual sexual activity with a willing participant as an adult. She was an adult. I was an adult. Nothing illegal was done. There was no coercion or anything like that. This is a non-issue, and it's still something that, like, to me is like, this is something I don't know if I'm comfortable discussing, because that has been programmed into you. Because even talking to you, who's another former Mormon or post-Mormon or however you characterize yourself, that still is programmed in my brain that is a shameful thing. That, when somebody else says, oh yeah, I went to another country and, me and this girl hooked up, and everybody would just be like, oh, yeah, cool. That for me, it's still one of those things that, like, there's a lot of emotions tied to it, because I believed after all was said and done, I was like, I've just lost my soul. And I went and I called the mission president the next day, and he had me ride on the bus. I had a disciplinary council, and I was sent home. And the thing was like, before I left on my mission, my dad had said to me, he said, son, don't come home unworthy, or come home worthy, or don't come home. He had said that to me. And so when I went and talked to my mission president, I was just like, maybe I should just stay here, because I don't think my parents are going to want me home. They specifically said they didn't want me home. When you go home, you're sitting there, and everybody's like, everybody knows, even if they don't know details, they know. And so you've got this whole public shame, sitting in church where your mom's sitting next to you, like weeping into her handkerchief, mm-hmm. and you go, and even months later, you go and you talk to somebody and you're like, hey, man, this girl's kind of cute. And like priesthood leaders are pulling those girls aside saying, don't date that guy because he came home early on his mission. You need to be aware of this, that he came home early on his mission. He's not a trustworthy guy. All of that stuff is very, very real. So this kind of toxic culture within Mormonism. And the thing is like, on my mission, I went to another country. I got to experience another culture. I got to learn another language. I got to be in a place that I had never been again. I probably never will be again. Just a really singular experience. I actually enjoyed missionary work. I believed that I was doing God's work. And today, these poor missionaries are going to stateside missions where their missionary experience consists of them spamming people on social media and posting free books of Mormon on Facebook Marketplace. And this is their experience. And I'm like, these guys, these poor kids, no wonder they're going home. Even if I hadn't I 100% believed in Mormonism as a missionary, but even if I didn't, I would have been like, where else am I going to be able to experience this? Being in this other country, experiencing this other culture. What an amazing opportunity, right? Because I'll still maintain to this day that my mission was a watershed moment in my life. It was something that helped me to mature and grow and develop, just because I was out of my house and I was on my own, so to speak, and in an unfamiliar place. That matures a person. But now when I see these poor missionaries now, they're going out, they don't know anything. They're thrust in these just tedious, boring situations. Oh gosh, I can't.
Well,
I can't imagine.
I was one of the missionaries in the MTC who wanted to go home. I didn't feel worthy. I felt like, because they greenhouse you, you get there and it's all, you've got these polished kids from Utah who've grown up in the bubble, and you're just like, oh, I'm not worthy to do what you're about to do. So I wanted to go home early. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, wanted to marry a return missionary. That's why I stayed. In the end, I fought with that and I stayed. But the mission that I served in was 2 miles from the home that I grew up in. And my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, lived in the mission. I live back in the mission now. Loads of friends and family live in the mission. So it was really weird. It was like being at home half the time.
So you went to a mission in England, just a short distance away from where you grew up?
Yeah. Like I could see the boundary. I could stand in the mission and look at my house.
Wow.
Multiple times, like it was a thing. Going down the motorway, my wife worked in a building at the side of the highway, and it had a big glass side, and her desk was right there. So if we were going to be driving by and I knew we were going to take a zone conference or something, I'd say, it's zone conference, like on the emails, it's zone conference on Wednesday. We'll be coming by around 10. And we'd be there in the mission car. We'd slow down to like 50 and we'd go by, and we'd be honking the horn, and then she'd stand at the window and wave at everyone. And everyone would be like, who's that? I'm like, it's my girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
It was just weird.
So is that normal in England or Europe? Okay, so that was an atypical experience. Okay.
Well, at the time they were calling a lot of English missionaries to English missions. So they were trying to dispel the whole American church thing by not having as many American missionaries knocking on the doors. So they wanted native English people, but now they send them around the world because, well, they're starting to again, because that's the only reason you go on a mission.
Well, there's only so many missions in England.
Yeah, there's like 5. So,
wow. For me, my experience was very much that I took glory in how horrible and horrifying your mission experience was from like a human rights perspective. So I had a good friend of mine who went to Mongolia, and in Mongolia, he's in a poorly developed country, and his appendix bursts. He gets appendicitis. And I think, and has to ride on a train with an inflamed appendix, something like 24 hours, to the only hospital. And he's there, and he almost dies. And his mom is telling me this story, because I hadn't got on my mission yet. His mom is telling me the story, and she's just beaming with pride because there's this fetishization of suffering within Mormonism, particularly on your mission. So if you go on a mission and you have a nice cushy apartment, a nice cushy area, that wasn't really a good mission experience. But if you go to this horrible part of town and you have no running water, and you get dysentery, and you get accosted or assaulted or robbed or even murdered, sign me up. That's the best kind of mission experience there could be. Yeah. And that was definitely how I looked at it. And so when I had friends who got called to, like my brother was called to Salt Lake City mission, and I had a friend who was called to the Rexburg, Idaho mission. And I was like, oh man, if I got called to a place like that where it was like, oh, everyone's already Mormon, I'd cry, because I want to go someplace where I'm going to be, almost murdered every day. Yeah. And So if I had been in your shoes and I had gotten a call to, for me, it would have been the Longview mission, the Longview, Texas mission, where I'm sitting here and I'm just like, I'm 30 minutes away from my house.
Yeah.
I'm 45-minute drive from my house. I would have been devastated.
I was in the MTC in Preston, and I was really struggling. Like, I got to the point where I went to the MTC president's office to just go home, to say I'm not worthy, this, that, and the other, which was just, I was worthy, but I felt unworthy. And he wasn't there. And I think that's the only reason that I served a mission in the end, because he wasn't there that night, because I was in pieces. Like, mentally it had broken me. And I was going to him and I was not taking no for an answer, because there was a ward temple trip the second Thursday I was in the MTC, and the bus was coming from my home ward with my whole family and everyone to the temple, and the MTC is on the temple grounds. So I saw all of my family, and I was having a really hard time, and I convinced myself I'm going home on that coach. Nothing is going to stop me. I'm going home on that coach. And then I told my girlfriend, now my wife, and she told me basically, if you come home, that's it. I'm marrying a return missionary. And I can't blame her for that, because that's the world she grew up in. So I didn't go home. But I didn't get, like, I always thought, I'm going to go on a mission to a foreign land. I'm going to learn the language, the culture, and then I'm going to use that to work for the British government or do something, because in the States, a lot of people go into government service in the CIA and different things because they've lived and breathed those cultures and countries, and they can, I guess, acclimatize quickly to being out there and reporting back. But yeah, over here, a mission, like, you put it on your resume and then you go for a job and people just like, so what did you do for 2 years? I'm like, I sold religion door to door for 2 years. And how successful were you? Not very.
Yeah. I can't imagine particularly with the climate nowadays, with kind of the awareness about colonization and things like that, that putting a mission on a resume would have the clout that it did. Even when I got into medical school and they specifically wanted to ask me about it. They're like, tell us about this mission that you did. Wow. So you went to Brazil and what an amazing experience. And I was just like, yes, it was an amazing experience, nowadays, of course I'm aware now, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was sitting in these people's homes and I was like trying to Americanize it. I was literally a colonizer. It's just, and my biggest regret is that I didn't spend more time just learning about Brazil and soaking up as much Brazil as I could. And I was worried more about, these people just don't know enough. Quotes by Jeffrey Holland.
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember being street contacting. There were some other elders there, and we were talking about going home, and we were talking like, man, the world's our oyster. We've done this now. And he was going back to Utah, so it was. He would go back with that little shiny RM badge, and people would be like, oh, he's fresh back. We need to give him help. We need to give him a break. We need to give him a job.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I went home, and I didn't really go home. I moved straight to the town that my girlfriend lives in, which was right next door to the mission center. So it was, people were just like, so what have you been doing? Like, wasting your time here for 2 years, just messing around. Anyway, time is fast spent, Brother Lee. Yeah. And I just want to end on one video, which for anyone who goes to find Not the White Wizard on TikTok, which you should all do using the link below, you will see that there is the perfect place for ex-Mormons to learn about breaking the word of wisdom. And these are awesome because Chris goes through and, it's like a cocktail masterclass. And this was one of my favorites. This is one of my favorites from you. So here we go, and then we'll wrap up.
Hey Exmos, let's break the word of wisdom eagle style by making a tequila sunrise. For this cocktail, you'll need tequila, orange juice, and grenadine. Start by adding ice to either a highball or a Collins glass, and then measure a 2-ounce shot of your favorite tequila. Remember, Jesus may have drinking wine, but the devil drinks tequila. Next, come behind that with some orange juice. Fresh squeezed is best. But who are we kidding? Our final ingredient is grenadine. Pour it slowly, letting it settle to the bottom, giving it that characteristic appearance of a sunrise. Garnish with a citrus wheel and enjoy. Now that's apostasy.
That was amazing. That's it's like an ad on TV, but you talk
the quick cuts, just the music. Yeah. My production level. I became a TikTok master. That was my that was one of the things that I was like, oh, this is kind of a cool idea, because so many people, when they leave Mormonism, and if anybody's watching this who's not Mormon, you are forbidden from drinking coffee and alcohol and participating in any kind of narcotic type substance and tobacco. So alcohol, tobacco, coffee, tea, and illicit recreational drugs. So when you leave Mormonism right out of the gate, for a lot of people, it's like, oh, I can do this stuff now. I can have coffee now. I can drink alcohol now. And because I was 33 when I had my very first cup of coffee. I was in my residency. I'd finished medical school and I'm in my residency, and everybody's like, we're going to go get a cup of coffee in the lounge. And I was like, I'm going to go and get a cup of coffee in the lounge as well. So, we toddle onto the lounge, and they had like a Keurig machine, so it's the worst coffee ever. And they're putting their little cup in the thing, and I'm trying so hard to not be obvious that this is my first ever time having a cup of coffee. And I think I may have actually said, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be perfectly honest. I've never had coffee before. I'm not entirely sure what to do. So they helped me pick out one of the options for the cup. They were like, here, put some creamer in it, put some sugar in it. And I sat there and yeah. And I mean, this is horrible. This is the grossest thing ever. Why would anybody drink this on purpose?
Yeah.
And same thing. I think I went out I asked a neighbor. I was like, I've never had a beer before. Could we go and get a beer sometime? And he was like, this was in Cleveland. He was like, sure, let's go get a beer sometime. So we went and we had a beer, and he's like, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not much of a beer drinker. And I'm like, well, I'm not much of ordered a beer off the list. And I'm like, I guess I'll have this India Pale Ale. I'll have that. And they bring out an IP. Yeah, right.
Yeah, good luck with that.
This is horrible. Anyway, so there's like this level of knowledge and exposure that Mormons just don't have when it comes to things like making coffee. How do you make coffee? What do you do with it? And what are the different ways to make coffee? What are the different types of cocktails to make? And I knew a lot of Mormons who were kind of like, oh, well, don't, go to a bar. And I'm like, yeah, you can go to a bar. And that's definitely a good way to try some things out. But, going to a bar is expensive. And then you have the whole driving issue. And if you want to, put together a drink, learn how to make a cocktail at home, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And it's been one of those fun experiences of the post-Mormon life is learning how to make cappuccino, learning how to make lattes, learning how to make, different cocktails and things like that. My wife and I, we just went on a tour of the Kentucky bourbon country. So we went around and toured a whole bunch of distilleries and tasted different bourbons. And now I have a massive bourbon collection. I have like 10 bottles of bourbon, which is way more than I'll ever drink in a lifetime. But it's fun having these types of. This is really one of the most positive aspects of Mormonism, is that you have this opportunity to kind of enjoy these things that you're like, wow, this is something that I've part of it is like kind of, there may be a little bit of bitterness to it. Like, man, I missed out on this so long. But then there's times where my wife and I will be sitting on our patio drinking lattes, and we're sitting here and we're like, this is the best. This is the best. Mormons miss out on so much. They miss out on so many great moments where you can just sit and drink delicious coffee. it's just wonderful. It's so great. Anyway, but yeah, that's those videos were fun.
Yeah, and if there is no other reason that anyone goes and follows Chris on TikTok, do it for that, for Cocktails with Chris. But for any Mormons out there that have been watching,
breaking the word of wisdom and style.
Yeah, they will. I'm sure they will brand us Satan-worshipping alcoholics this evening. But we're okay with that because one day you will be there too.
Yeah, eventually.
But thank you everyone for watching. We want to try and get 300 likes on this video. Subscribe if you feel you can. If you want to help me with legal fees, there's a PayPal link in the description below. But Chris, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for everything you do on TikTok. Again, everyone, please go and follow Not the White Wizard on TikTok. But for now, that's it for today. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.